Welcome back for episode 10 of the Astronomical Apocrypha, the Seleukid Empire narrative Let's Play for Rome 2 with Divide et Impera. Last time, Antiochos II capped his victory over the Ptolemies in Egypt by proclaiming himself pharaoh and a living god, taking his honorific the title Theos. As the thunderbolts of Zeus and the heralds of Triton rebuilt forces in Alexandria and Mare Phoenicium respectively, Antiochos I received timely news from his spy Alcandre of the warlike Getae on the move, crossing the Danube and slipping into Thrace with deadly secrecy. With overwhelming numbers, the Getae struck at the dragons of Bel-Marduk, who sheltered on the unfinished Acropolis on the shore of Odessos, and their attack was only narrowly thwarted by repeated and desperate charges by Antiochos and his noble companion horsemen. They were eventually hunted down, eliminated, and tracked back across the river to their stronghold at Malva. Antiochos Theos was not entirely idle during this time, capturing the northeastern edge of Libya from the Ptolemies, now having driven the rival faction into a tiny territorial remnant at Aminium, cornered with the hostile Kyrenes to the west and their back to the Great Desert to the south. With the co-regents fighting on two fronts, now Diogenes and Euclid strike out on an audacious, even foolhardy expedition of their own, venturing far upriver to the southern border of Egypt, the ominous mountains and plateaus of Ethiopia rising in the distance.
I know I was summoned from Judea to track these savages into their highlands south of Egypt, but you've not told me why, Diogenes. Antiochos Theos is a jealous man, or a jealous god, I should say. His Egyptian priests, who've been repurposed to spread the cult of Zeus Ammon, were killed by the Miro, and their heads sent back to Alexandria as a declaration of war. The prince, of course, cannot abide these actions. Very well then, my Goose is on their scent. We'll track them to their settlement soon enough, although they may elude our warriors in the wilderness. We turn east now, away from the river. I thought we would follow the Nile. Too many predators near the water. The Goose cannot fly indefinitely. I'm fascinated by your pet, Euclid. What is his name? What do you mean? He's the Goose. Do you see any other geese around here? I see your point. I think the Hammers would benefit from a mascot too. Something to signify how I identify as one of the men. One of the men? You treat them like sheep, Diogenes, leading them whenever and wherever, slaughtering or shearing them as you see fit.
There's quite a lot still going on, but one theater of war seems to have reached a relative state of peace. With the Getae now subjugated, they don't pose a threat for the immediate future, although they could very well end up another disobedient and rebellious satrapy in time. There's an army of the Apulii nearby, and what they intend to do I have no idea, but I'm not waiting around to find out. Alcandre goes back to her post monitoring our ostensibly friendly rivals the Antigonids, while Antiochos takes the battered and tired dragons of Bel-Marduk back across the Danube, disbanding the Thracian mercenaries in favor of some legitimately trained native soldiers. Taking some more loyal and less costly Thyni Romphiophoroi swordsmen into the ranks, being himself a believer in the cultural diversity and melting pot of his imperial civilization. Euclid, or rather his Goose, leads the way south, taking a path paralleling the Nile on the east side into the territory of the Blimii. A trade partner, but in spite of that, not the least bit friendly, and not likely to appreciate our incursions. Diogenes and the Hammers follow shortly behind, as the two chart a course through uncertain lands to reach the Maro. Although I've still got a relatively large wealth surplus even after recruiting Antiochos Soter's Thracian swordsmen, it's spent in the blink of an eye as I swap the Alexandrian port over to a trade hub, upgrade the settlement of Hegra, and set up irrigation at Salamis. We have to choose another research target this turn as well. And now that we have plenty of building options up to the 3rd tier, I'm switching back to military technologies, working further into the management tree to pick up advanced chariot training. What on earth I'm going to do with this I have no idea, which is required on the way to Hellenization that gets us access to the Tier 3 hoplite barracks. Eurydice, having given up on poison, tries applying fire instead to the enemy settlement at Libya, with much better results. The Ptolemies in a panic move about their settlement but do little else during the intern phase. Our trade agreement with the quarrelsome Maine has been dissolved, although rather it's not the trade agreement per se that has ceased to exist, so much as the Maine faction itself, who Cappadocia have eliminated in the push for additional territory in Arabia. Antiochos Soter, wherever he goes, remains a potential target for assassins as much as ever. We're reminded by another unsuccessful but still aggravating assassination attempt that wounds our faction leader, knocking him out of the action yet again. And I temporarily replace him with Eualcidas, a member of the royal household, perhaps a cousin. Antiochos Theos now moves his army south from Peritonion, again attempting to set up an ambush on the path to the devastated city, baiting another Ptolemaic strike. In nearby Egypt, the construction goes on, converting the stables at Memphis and upgrading the Hellenistic temple at Myos Hormos. Taking a look at Eualcidas, he's actually pretty good, having good baseline statistics and a healthy dose of anxiety like Antiochos Soter himself, particularly appropriate in light of the king's recent brush with death. He's also got a real catch of a wife, having married a domestic goddess that for whatever reason makes him more zealous. And yet he's got a measure of temperance about him, a degree of self-control that for whatever reason adds still more zeal and causes his enemies to quake in fear. And it's represented by a picture of a scourge or perhaps a horsewhip. The whole ensemble seems a bit indecent, but we'll round him out by adding a heroic hoplite to his entourage of shield-bearers. Way down south in Ethiopia, Diogenes and Euclid are escorted from Ptolemais Theron by 2 full stacks of the Blemmii, who shadow them all the way to the border. The Ptolemaic agent Cleisthenes passes south across Antiochos' path, perhaps spotting his army lying in ambush, and he continues on to make a move against Eurydice, the outcome of which is plain to see. The defenders of the Nile, presumably tipped off to Antiochos' position or just wising up to his tactics, do head north, but take a circuitous route to the west to avoid triggering the ambush. However, the nearby Kyrene force strikes at them, and though they've been defeated and driven back, this will have weakened our foes substantially. Just to keep them from taking advantage of our exposed position, Eurydice preemptively sabotages the remaining Ptolemaic army at Ammunium. With that taken care of, Antiochos Theos marches westward to engage the now weakened defenders of the Nile, and their eerily similar appearing commander. Although quite tempted to resort to a lazy auto-resolve here, I couldn't stomach the loss of over 25% of our army, so we'll try to flush the defenders out of their fort manually. I think this will be a fairly straightforward assault that does not necessitate any sort of dividing of our forces or fancy tactics. We're simply going to sit back and lob flaming shot and sling stones until our enemies find it necessary to sally out against us. Fortunately, it doesn't take much encouragement as the first missiles fired by the Lithobolus already have the enemy rushing out of their front gate. I order the slingers forward while Antiochos and the cavalry wait patiently on the right-hand wing for an opportunity to strike. The Ptolemaic Lonkophoroi on the southern wing make a suicidal charge into our own citizen cavalry, and Antiochos and his men draw first blood in the battle by bringing down the hapless Ptolemaic light cavalry. While the bulk of the enemy infantry are making their relatively slower advance down the center under continual bombardment by the Jewish slingers, my hoplite guarding our left flank tangle with the enemy cavalry there, generally getting the better of the engagement, and they're supported by the adjacent regiment of thorax swordsmen who fling their javelins into the Ptolemaic skirmish cavalry before assisting their comrades against the already dwindling enemy heavy cavalry regiment. Antiochos, having demolished the enemy light cavalry, brings his men around the southeastern hindquarter of the enemy army in preparation for the impending hammer strike, as the 2 front lines of infantry meet in battle, our lesser number of pike regiments holding off a large number of enemies, augmented by our superior swordsmen. I send my leftward unit of pikes off at an angle to assist the cavalry attacking our flank, while our swordsmen there, now engaged and with their backs to their assailants, suffer some painful javelin volleys from the Tarantinoi Hippaeus regiment. As the Ptolemaic heavy cavalry fall back, their more lightly armed brethren throw down their missiles and charge straight in at the Thureophori swordsmen, heedless of the inevitable outcome with the pike phalanx and the hoplite regiment in immediate proximity. Our other nearby Thriophora unit wraps around the side of the enemy assault, and with the infantry now boxed in and Antiochos and his men closing rapidly, Nicomachos, the Theos doppelganger, and his royal phalanx wander indecisively in the face of quickly worsening odds. Rear charges from the citizen cavalry cause the enemy morale to plummet, and pretty quickly the only units not running for their lives are Nicomachos and his retinue, a group of peltasts fighting Antiochos who absolutely refuse to break, and a small nearby unit of light Ptolemaic cavalry who managed to collect themselves and return to the fight after being routed once. The hoplite make quick work of the weakened Lonkophoroi regiment, while my admittedly inferior Phalangitai tangle with Nicomachos and his men. Nevertheless, the enemy general finds himself in increasingly hot water as more and more of our units close in and surround his retinue. They actually break without having suffered too many casualties, granting us the victory, but I take advantage of the post-victory phase to run down the enemy general. There's room for only one bearded Macedonian in Africa. Find me that Ptolemaic captain, Nicomachos. I'm told he looks just like me. Alive, of course, if possible. Really, dead is acceptable as well. Actually, just bring me his head. I want to see this handsome devil with my own eyes. We can cast the face with wax and give it to the sculptors. I'm much too busy to provide my likeness in person. The priests of Ammon take a great deal of my time with their pointless rituals, and the rest is accounted for by the endless stream of supplicants. I leave the rest of the battle in the hands of the young man from Kyrene. Fetch a cask each of the Egyptian 5 wines. I intend to put all of the entombed pharaohs under the table tonight. From 25% losses to 10% is an acceptable trade-off, I think, for the time spent. Nothing much to report here except to note that those mounted enemy skirmishers by far did the most damage to our men, dropping one of our regiments of swordmen to half strength, something to watch out for in the future. The Ptolemaic army is driven back, not destroyed but certainly crippled and bereft of its leadership. Antiochos is mostly interested in just making his way back to the road to avoid the desert attrition, as we've nothing to fear from the remainder of the Ptolemaic military for now. Euclid and Diogenes still find themselves being followed by the creepy Blemii en route to Mero, which they nevertheless find completely undefended aside from its sizable but outclassed garrison. I've got just enough movement for Diogenes and the Hammers to reach the perimeter of the city and participate in the siege started by Euclid, and the auto-resolve this time is giving us actually a fairly generous result by the numbers. As we've seen before, city assaults can get pretty bloody. So I'm going to take the gift that has been given to us and capture the city, as Euclid pays the Mero garrison commander the disrespect of a kick to the crotch before dispatching him. This works out well since we're able to replenish our men now that we've swiftly taken the region. But where are the Mero? I'm not sure if they have no military or they're off adventuring elsewhere, but I leave Euclid inside the city walls just in case. While I'm at it, I go ahead and update Diogenes' old Macharophori to Thriophori. The smaller Ptolemaic army moves north out of Ammonium, while their comrades are trapped by Eurydice's sabotage success, and the defenders of the Nile, though devastated by Antiochos' attack, still find the strength to battle and destroy their original aggressors, the Kyrene, at the coast of Libya. Carpacica, having aroused the suspicion of other powers in the Arabian Peninsula, have come under attack by the weaker Hagar tribe. I've elected to support our ally in this war, without much reason to do otherwise. With rebellion about to occur in Peritonean, I move Cordelian back into port to prevent the city from being recaptured by the Ptolemies or the rebels. Given that a rebellion will probably happen anyway, now is as good a time as ever to capture the Ptolemies' last settlement at Ammonium, which Antiochos assaults, finding the adjacent Sons of Zeus Ammon easy to eliminate in their fortified stance with the city garrison excluded by the night battle setting. With the garrison now alone, the city is easily taken in a decisive auto-resolve. With the Ptolemaic armies now with no home to return to and suffering attrition on their own, Eurydice sabotages the supplies of the smaller force to prevent them from moving far. Down in Ethiopia, the Blemii seem to have accepted our presence to a degree, moving back to the border with their own settlement. There is still no sign of the Mero, so I assume they must be sheltering at Axum, if anywhere. I'm going to make their home settlement a little bit more hospitable and sanitary by adding an aqueduct in the empty slot, although the cultures here remain firmly Ethiopian, limiting our recruitment options. I move Diogenes and Euclid out of the city to the east, and toward the remaining Mero settlement. The Ptolemoi predictably make one final push to retake a shred of their former kingdom at Peritoneum, augmented by some mercenary desert spearmen and elephants, but Cordelian cuts down the defenders of the Nile with ease, leaving the sons of Zeus Ammon the last of their remaining forces, with the Kyrenes closing fast. With his moment of triumph over the Ptolemies at hand, unbelievably, Antiochos Theos succumbs in very ungodlike fashion to, of all things, fatigue. He's just so overcome by the exertions of the desert, he finds himself in the infirmary. We have a very interesting candidate to replace the now injured Antiochos Theos, someone by the name of Antigonos. Not the now deposed Antigonos Gonatas, but Antigonos Doson, the son of Demetrios the Fair. This man has a very impressive pedigree, being descended through his father from Demetrios the Besieger, and on his mother's side from Ptolemies Soter, and likely joined our cause with his father, now the lover of Apama II, Antiochos Soter's daughter in Kyrene. He could have a strong claim to the throne of Macedon, even if only as a Seleukid puppet. My income is becoming much better, and we'll be finding eventually that we want to expand our provinces. In particular, the somewhat sluggish growth of Mesopotamia I want to address by replacing the industrial infrastructure there with one of our new aqueduct systems, and I do the same at Ankara. With the rest of my wealth, I'm finally bringing Peritoneum back to a reasonable state by rebuilding the Greek shrine and a homestead in the now empty deconstructed slots. I was tempted to convert the Tier 3 Eastern Bazaar Ethiopian communal structure over to a research-powering Lycaean, or a public descent-smothering Odeon at Mero, each of which can be had for a very reasonable cost, but the bazaar is providing some much-needed food supply for the region that I can't replace yet. Diogenes and Euclid venture further east to the border with Axum. Although the Blumii could declare war on us and take the city, I've decided to chance it. Pergamon asked for a defensive alliance, although they want a token of appreciation for their treaty. I agree to their request sans the bribery. Now we've another ally or satrap relay that has come under attack, and this time it's the Getae, our satrapy north of the Danube, who are under attack by our rival barbarian kingdom, the Lugos. I have no interest in starting another war in the north, so I'm forced to let this satrapy leave the fold to fight their war on their own. I didn't think it would last long anyway, and at least now they'll be busy fighting somewhere other than Thrace. Now the Blumii show up, and not from where I expected. It seems they were away downriver for some reason, and they return with a vengeance, 2 full stacks of Ethiopians leaving the city garrison with no chance whatsoever. The intern phase isn't all bad news, however, as the Kyrenes take action against the Ptolemies in Libya. Fortunately, amid all this chaos and discord, both our co-regents have returned from their injuries this turn, and with the festival of Thesmophoria promises to ease our public order pain somewhat. Euclid and Diogenes, tricked into losing the settlement they had just won easily, backtrack toward what promises to be a much more difficult siege with the Mero forces now dug in behind the walls. Now with all of their time spent together, Diogenes, like Euclid, has taken on a pet in his household, and although I'm sure it's statistically inferior, I can't resist replacing his item with the new creature. There's an unseemly parallel between the flavor text and the bonuses, but we have to leave something to the imagination. Antigonos Doson takes the thunderbolts north toward Peritoneum, while Antiochos recovers from whatever ailed him, the official word being desert fatigue. The rumors say alcohol poisoning from overindulgence. Though we can't reach the Ptolemaic force this turn, we're saved the trouble as they use what's left of their own existence to make a suicidal assault against Cordelian and the Peritonean garrison, finally snuffing out the sputtering flame of the Ptolemaic faction entirely. Our allies, presumably Katpatchika, want us to sink a Hagar fleet in the Persian Gulf, although there's no way it will happen. Cordelian also gets a new household item of his own, and while you would think the trident of a god would be pretty good, this one takes the cake. Like the pilot he had before, this shipwright also adds a bonus to authority, but it reduces ship construction costs by 10% and reduces fleet upkeep by a whopping 20%. This guy is a keeper. The poor abused Mero garrison once again falls to the combined strength of the menagerie of Euclid and Diogenes. So we've retaken the city, although I once again have no idea where the Mero have gone off to. I have some extra money I was saving for this turn, so we'll use it to rebuild the aqueduct and also to begin the costly settlement conversion. With a part of the rest, I want to recruit an agent to help track down our enemies. I settle on Clonius, who of course has the apparently defining Seleukid trait of anxiety. But he's also an officer with a bunch of bonuses for an attached army, so he'll prove useful in that regard once he's finished his mission. Antiochos I and II rejoin their respective armies, and the Thunderbolts move back toward Alexandria. Eurydice now begins what promises to be a very lengthy scouting expedition, heading west into the uncharted lands of Kyrenaica and western Libya and Africa. Next season, our new officer Clonius heads west to scout the Mero position, but finds nothing. Antiochos Theos, now back in Egypt with the Thunderbolts, adds some war elephants to his already impressive force. Meanwhile, Eurydice continues her journey across the coastline into the very western edge of Libya, between Kyrene and Augila. It's just close enough to the border with Carthaginian territory that we now have an awareness of the faction and can trade with them. They are, of course, very interested and willing to pay handsomely to have access to the overflowing resources of the Seleukid Empire that literally extend off the right-hand edge of the diplomacy panel. I bargained for 9,000 talents, to which they won't agree, and eventually settle on a compromise that includes trade, a payment of 7,200, and a non-aggression pact. This trade pact in turn has given us some additional insight into the campaign map, and we can see that the Carthaginians are already losing badly against the aggressor Rome, who have taken sections of Africa, including Thapsos and the city of Carthage itself. That trade agreement and the cash that came with it now has given us even more options to build and expand. It's very expensive, but I like to upgrade our capital at Antioch to a Tier 3 trade kleroukia, and offsetting the growing demand for food throughout the empire with more irrigation in Mesopotamia. The Mero, elusive though they are, sent an envoy asking for peace. Perhaps they don't actually care much for their capital settlement. Diogenes refuses, and the two Mero armies then appear out of thin air on the northern border with Ptolemies Theron. Poor Clonius has found himself traveling in a completely wrong direction, so he heads back toward Mero, although he doesn't quite have the movement to directly oppose our enemies this turn. Eurydice also remains on the move, albeit in a more consistent direction as she heads west through Carthaginian sections of Africa. With our extra surplus this turn, I want to make sure Diogenes and Euclid are assured victory against the Mero, and I'm not caught unprepared for any shady off-the-cuff alliances between them and the Blemii. To that end, I'm raising a temporary new army for Diogenes' loyal captain Agirios. Agirios adds a couple of mercenary African elephants to his army, and recruits some Nubian archers from the local region. With the Mero now nearing their namesake city and raiding the surrounding region, Clonius moves in to try and decapitate one of the armies by challenging its commander to single combat. Sadly, it seems our champion himself is wounded in this attempt, a wasted effort aside from the experience Clonius himself has gained from the School of Hard Knocks. Diogenes and the Hammers make the first strike against the Mero forces, engaging their lead army, the Children of the Sun, in a night battle. We have a reasonably strong advantage against this force, which is composed mostly of spearmen, with a strong contingent of archers as well. We're assaulting the Mero in a moderately forested area of wilderness, and aside from the patches of forest all around, there are no other significant pieces of terrain, such as elevation or structures, to pay attention to. We're setting up along the western side of the Mero line, with Diogenes and the cavalry deploying in the flat, unforested area on the right. Much of our force remains hidden, as I'm sure do many of the enemy regiments, but already the Mero cavalry are sweeping around toward our western flank. I'm not too concerned though, since we've got numerous flexible hoplite regiments, and some pikemen to threaten their horses should they get too close. As the first unit of Ethiopian cavalry veers into the western end of our line, they're met with a barrage of javelins from the Theriaphore swordsmen, who then raise their shields and charge in to engage the cavalry in melee, taking substantial losses as a result, but pinning the unit in place for the hoplite who advance on their flank. A very long line of Mero infantry materialize as more and more Ethiopian soldiers emerge from the trees, in general a mix of spear infantry interspersed with archers who plunge through the trees and undergrowth toward our own front line. On the far eastern end, two more regiments of Ethiopian horsemen threaten our right flank, although they come under assault by our javelin-armed skirmish cavalry, as Diogenes and the Longophoroi rush to engage them in melee. With my own horsemen bunched up and mauling one regiment of Mero cavalry, the other takes advantage of the chaos to make their own flank charge against my general. The chain reaction propagates to the eastern end of my infantry line, drawing off one of my two right-hand hoplite regiments who change course and run backward to assist Diogenes and his retinue. The other hoplite regiment on the right engages two approaching Ethiopian infantry regiments, as the Greek toxitoi rush away from the developing melee. On the other end of the line, my infantry have driven off the other Ethiopian cavalry regiment, and begin making their advance toward the center, where my pikemen and Theriaphore swordsmen are holding off the central thrust of the enemy attack. One of the Therios swordsman regiments has even made its way into the rear of the enemy line, where they're demolishing some Ethiopian archers, but soon find themselves under overwhelming assault by Ethiopian spearmen and Kushite painted warriors. The enemy general lets loose with his rallying battle cry at this relatively critical moment, bolstering the morale of numerous Ethiopian regiments on the right, as Diogenes and our melee cavalry break free of their engagement to assist our beleaguered hoplite and counter the Ethiopian general's presence. As our men surround the Mero general, Diogenes and his retinue swing around for a devastating rear assault, augmenting their cavalry charge with his own abilities. With several Ethiopian regiments already wavering, this starts to propagate a chain reaction of morale shocks along the enemy line, although some fierce Kushite painted warriors hurtle toward the end of my pike line, bound to make an impact of their own. As the pikemen, barely noticing the Kushite warriors in time, begin to pull back and reform their line, a timely intervention by the Greek skirmish cavalry causes the Ethiopian swordsmen to pull away from their original target, and instead rush after the light cavalry, which is of course totally ineffective and allows the pikes to reform their wall in the appropriate direction. In a matter of seconds, the enemy general Natakani and his retinue have not only been routed, but completely shattered, no longer a factor in the outcome of the battle, and Diogenes pulls his men through the carnage to roll up the eastern flank of the Ethiopian force. The Kushite swordsmen behind our line, now chasing after our archers, suffer a continual bombardment of arrows and javelins, though I'm forced to bring the skirmish cavalry into melee to keep them off the infantry archers, thinking that the cavalry charge bonus would make the difference. It does, and ultimately destroys the Kushite regiment, but the skirmish cavalry suffer badly from the assault, being only lightly armored and relatively few in number. Although the battle has only swung slightly into our favor by the balance of things, most of the regiments left unbroken are archers who are quite vulnerable to Diogenes and the cavalry. I'm careful to engage the few remaining Ethiopian spear regiments with my own infantry before sending in the cavalry. After a few minutes of this maneuvering, I'm eventually able to trap and eliminate all of the more dangerous enemy spearmen, and then set to work running down the archer regiments. Even a couple of rallying spear regiments fail to return to the battle, as they witness their archer comrades fleeing the massacre. I run down those I can, although several enemies manage to make it to the battlefield perimeter.
After them. If you cannot run them down, herd them in the other direction, just like lambs to the slaughter. It's nearly dawn, so there's no time to waste. But don't over-pursue or venture too far. Stay with the rest of our flock. Agirios and the irregulars will be here shortly, and after them, Euclid will arrive to commence the assault on the Mero encampment. I have no intention of letting them escape back into the jungle or hide amongst the Blimii to the northeast. Stay focused, for Euclid will need our artillery and our strength for the coming fight. There will be time to ruminate on this success after the settlement is secure from the natives.
The enemy general survives, although most of his accompanying regiments perish in the battle, and together they're driven back to the northern border of the region to shelter alongside the Blimii there. With Diogenes in striking distance of the remaining Mero army, the Lords of War, his captain Agirios moves up with the irregulars, followed by Euclid and the wisdom of the Goose. Combined, the three armies make short work of the Lords of War, completely destroying their army with relatively low numbers of losses among our own men. Euclid, with his remaining movement, is able to catch up to the remnants of the Children of the Sun at the northern border, and they too fall easy prey to the Goose, being unassisted by the adjacent Blimii. I disband the depleted Thureophoroi and the hammers of Hephaestos, replacing them with Agirios' elephants, and likewise replace two of the inferior Greek Toxotai regiments for the superior Nubian archers. Agirios and his army are subsequently disbanded so that Agirios can rejoin Diogenes' retinue in the hammers. Antiochos Theos and the thunderbolts of Zeus board the nearby ships of the Heralds of Triton off the coast of Paratonion to make the long journey across the Mediterranean, his final gift to the people of Libya, a dedication of the sacred grove at Paratonion. Next turn, Euclid returns to garrison the city of Mero, while Diogenes continues south on the road toward Axum. Antiochos Soter, now working on the infrastructure of Thrace, has begun building a training field already, and this turn begins the central upgrade at Anthea to a farming settlement. We're still researching in the military tree, although this turn I switch over to the siege technology branch. Thanks to the Ptolemies, we already have a shieldmaker town available in Egypt, but I don't yet have a blacksmith to improve our weapons, so we're going to start on siege tower technology, which for whatever reason unlocks the blacksmith, and of course it should enable siege towers for us. The Hagar offer peace, and although I think we'll eventually be forced to deal with them militarily, they aren't in our crosshairs at the moment. They are motivated enough to offer a tidy sum of 2,000 talents, so I accept the peace deal, figuring that it will probably have expired by the time I can make it to their territory in any event. Diogenes heads a bit further east, along the sandy road toward Axum, closer but not quite in range to that city, while Clonius hustles up to catch up and join the army to enable his military training passive skill. With the extra money this turn, Odessos also gets a settlement upgrade, this time to a Hellenistic Komai that will give us access to more of the trained slaves resource. I think this may be a tradable resource, and I also believe it's required for the Antioch special building. Eurydice has by now made it to the northern part of Africa at Tisapsos, just southeast of Carthage, both settlements held by the Romans, including particularly fearsome-looking force of heavy Roman infantry at Tisapsos. Many of these units have heavy armor in the range of 50 or more, while several have absurdly high morale up to the 90s. One of our satrapies in the Far East, Drangiana, are once again under attack by Takashila. Even though the balance here favors Takashila, we'll come to the aid of our satrapy so as to avoid losing them, and this should also bring in the remainder of our satrapies against the aggressor faction. We have unfortunately been struck by the infamous Black Sheep event this turn, and we're faced once again with the option to pay the man's debts or disown him. We don't have the time or the surplus money for hangers-on, so this man Brasidas will have to find his own way outside the royal household. Diogenes now has line of sight to Axum, and although his army as a whole can't reach the settlement this turn, we're close enough that Clonius can act on the enemy general there, a lower-ranked commander who has reconstituted the Children of the Sun to defend the city. Clonius' slaughter attempt is successful, removing the general and his retinue, and leaving only the city garrison to defend the settlement. Takashila perhaps gambled that we would not intercede on behalf of our satrapy, but evidently they guessed wrongly because they are now almost immediately seeking terms for peace, and the outcome for us is highly advantageous. Not only are they forced to make peace with Drangiana, they are paying hefty reparations for a war that has hardly even occurred. We lost some court nobles as a result of our actions against the Black Sheep in the family, although I doubt this will have serious repercussions with the faction now in the hands of our two strong co-regents. Antiochos Theos and his men have been suffering pretty severe attrition due to the sea crossing, and I need somewhere to put them ashore. We can reach Sparta this turn, but I need to broker a military access pact with the Epirotes. Fortunately, they're not only willing to agree to this, but also to upgrade our alliance from defensive to military. With this done, the seasick survivors of the journey of the Thunderbolts of Zeus put ashore at Sparta, now in the hands of Epirus, to rejuvenate their losses, while Cordelian heads further into the Aegean Sea. With Antigonus Dozan and Antiochos Theos now approaching from the south, and Antiochos Soter in the mountain passes to the north, the stage is now set for the war for the Macedonian homeland.